Hello. Is there a connection between climate and the planet's elliptic orbits? It doesn't sound much likely, but this is a topic in this presentation. To be able to understand the cause of climate change, we must learn the nature's own language. Nature speaks to us from measurements, and nature's own language is mathematics. And what the nature's language tells us is that the climate on Earth is controlled by changes in the solar system, where the Moon and the planets are the first cause. My name is Harald Yndestad, and I am Professor Emeritus at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway. My professional background is cybernetics and signal theory. I have studied lunar influences on climate and ecosystem variability, planets' influences on solar variability, and solar-lunar influences on global climate variability. The climate clock hypothesis is based on the idea that the climate is controlled by periodic changes in the solar system. The climate clock has two sources, a solar forced clock and a lunar forced clock. The lunar-driven clock affects the tide and the sea temperature distributions in the ocean currents. The source of the solar clock is the planets, which influences the solar dynamo and the radiations from the sun's surface. Climate oscillations then is a product of solar-driven periods and lunar-driven periods. The language of nature is mathematics. We find the footprints of climate change by measurements and store the measurements in data series. The fingerprint of the source of the data series variations is a data series spectrum. If the source has deterministic periods, we can compute future events, where periods are like pointers on a clock, and the events are the pointer directions. So, how can planets affect radiations from the sun? The planets follow elliptic orbits. They have the highest speed most close to the sun at perihelion. The planets and the sun have a common mass center, which is called a barycenter. The sun then influences the sun's orbit around the barycenter. This figure on the left side shows the solar oscillation around the barycenter in a period of about 100 years. It looks chaotic, but it is not. The figure on the right side shows the fingerprint of the solar position around the barycenter. The fingerprint shows the periods from the large planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, which have periods of 11, 29, 84 and 164 years. The planet position oscillations around the sun then influences the solar position oscillations around the barycenter. Rotation of the sun position around the barycenter leads to a rotation of the inner solar dynamo. The rotation of the solar dynamo influences the solar radiation from the Sun's surface. The solar irradiation is related to the solar dynamo speed, the solar position speed, and the planet position speed. The solar position has a maximum speed when the 4 planets has a perihelion at the same time. And changes in the height speed gives maximum effect according to Maximus' law. We can then study the connection between Uranus and Neptune in a total period of 4,480 years. They have periods of 84 and 164 years, and they have a common perihelion time at the year 1714. This figure shows an index of perihelion coincidences between Uranus and Neptune from 2000 before Christ to 2200. It shows a perfect coincidence at the year 1714, as expected. The coincidence index has a minimum at the year 512 before Christ. Glaciers in Norway started to grow at about 500 years before Christ, when Uranus and Neptune had a minimum perihelion coincidence. Glaciers in Norway had a maximum extent in 1714, when Uranus and Neptune had a maximum perihelion coincidence. This reveals a direct relation between planets' perihelion coincidences and climate periods. We had the Little Ice Age from about 1300 to 1850. Uranus and Neptune had almost perfect perihelion coincidences 3 times, from about 1345 to 1837. The same period when we had the Little Ice Age. Looking for new Uranus-Neptune coincidences forward to the year 3000. The figure indicates that we may expect a new set of cold and warm climate periods. This is the Briksdal Glacier in Norway. The picture was taken at the glacier maximum at the year 1724. 20 years ago, it had a maximum at the water behind the trees. Now the glacier is climbing up the mountain. A next interesting study is the years when the planets Saturn, Uranus and Neptune have a perihelion coincidence at the same time. This figure shows perihelion coincidences between Saturn, Uranus and Neptune from 2000 before Christ to 2200. It follows an envelope period of 4,480 years and have a minimum at 512 before Christ and a maximum at the year 1710. At the same time, the coincidences are now much more complex. Here the blue line shows perihelion coincidences from the year 1000 to the year 2300. The red line shows only the Saturn period. We see that the Saturn period slowly changes the position of minimum and maximum. And the total coincidence between Saturn, Uranus and Neptune is changes in the total envelope period of 4,480 years. The irradiation from the Sun is not constant. Periods with less irradiation from the Sun is so well known that they have their own names. After the year 1000, we have the solar minimum periods Oort, Wolf, Spörer, Maunder and Dalton. This figure shows there is a direct relation between minimum solar periods and maximum perihelion coincidence between the planets Saturn, Uranus and Neptune. Planet perihelion coincidences are related to solar minimum and cold climate periods. The planets had a computed perfect perihelion coincidence at the year 1710 in the cold Maunder period. The year 1709 is known as a deep freeze year. It was the coldest year ever recorded. This is a picture from Venedig, Italy, where people was walking on ice on the sea outside the city. In France, the temperature was dropped below 20 degrees Celsius, and rivers, channels and ports was frozen in the whole Europe. The population dropped by 600,000 in France. The Baltic Sea froze solid for 4 months. Travelers were crossing by foot or by horse from Denmark to Sweden and to Norway. The planets continues to move in their orbits, and sooner or later they will have a new perihelion coincidence. The next computed perihelion coincidence is about from 2030 to 2070. This indicates that we may expect a gradually colder climate from about 2030 to a minimum at about 2070. How cold this new cold climate period is expected to be is unclear. The planet Saturn has opposite phase next time the planets Uranus and Neptune have a perihelion coincidence. This indicates that this will not be a new Maunder time solar minimum period, but it may cover a longer time period, maybe more than 100 years. So the fingerprints from the large planets are telling us that the winter is coming, and the glaciers are coming back, at least for a period. But in a time perspective of 1,000 years, we may expect a gradually warmer climate. Cold periods are less cold, and new warm periods are warmer.